Right now, somewhere on this planet, it is raining. You don't think much of it. You watch it through a window, maybe you complain about your commute. But your ancestors, almost every single group of them on every continent, once looked at rain like that and saw the end of the world. That's not a coincidence. That's a memory. You've heard the story. A flood covers the earth. One family survives. The waters recede and the world starts over. You probably assumed it was just a Bible story, a myth passed down to teach a lesson. But the real answer is far stranger. Versions of this story exist in over 200 cultures, separated by oceans, by thousands of years, by languages that share no common root. And when geologists finally went looking for evidence, they found something they didn't expect. Let's start with what you were taught to dismiss. The flood account in Genesis isn't alone. The Mesopotamians told it too, centuries earlier, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. A man named Utnapishtim builds a boat, loads it with animals, survives a flood sent by angry gods. The Greeks had Deucalion, the Hindus had Manu. Indigenous nations across the Americas, from the Hopi to the Muisca, carried flood stories long before any European ship reached their shores. How does a story like that spread to people who never met? For a long time, scholars assumed one explanation copied into another, culture borrowing from culture along trade routes. That theory works for some cases, it completely fails for others. The flood myths of isolated Pacific islanders, cut off from Mesopotamia by thousands of miles of open ocean, contain the same core structure: a warning, a vessel, a survivor, a new beginning. When a pattern shows up in places history says never touched each other, you have to ask a harder question. What if the story isn't a copy? What if it's a memory? This is where the ground itself starts talking. In 1929, an archaeologist named Leonard Woolley was excavating the ancient Sumerian city of Ur, digging layer by layer through thousands of years of human settlement. Pottery, tools, walls, the normal debris of civilization stacked like pages in a book. Then, abruptly, nothing. A thick band of clean, water-laid silt, over 8 feet deep with no trace of human activity inside it. Beneath the silt, one culture. Above it, a different one entirely. Woolley didn't hesitate to call it what it looked like: evidence of an enormous flood. One so severe it wiped out an entire settlement and left the region unrecognizable to whoever came after. Was it worldwide? Almost certainly not. Modern geology hasn't found evidence of a single flood that submerged the entire planet at once, but you don't need a planet-sized flood to explain a civilization-sized memory. You just need one bad enough that everyone who survived it never stopped talking about it. In 1997, two geologists at Columbia University, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, proposed something that reframed the entire conversation. They studied the floor of the Black Sea and found old shorelines, freshwater mollusk shells, and drowned river valleys sitting hundreds of feet below the current surface. Their theory was that around 5,600 BCE, rising sea levels breached a natural land barrier at what is now the Bosphorus Strait, and the Mediterranean Sea poured into a freshwater lake basin with catastrophic force. Not a slow rise, a wall of water, expanding the lake by miles per day, drowning farmland that entire communities depended on. People living along that lake would have watched their world disappear in a matter of weeks, and if any of them survived to tell their children what happened, you can guess what kind of story got passed down. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Psychologists who study oral tradition, including work built on the research of folklorist Alan Dundes, have shown that trauma doesn't just get remembered, it gets encoded into ritual, into religion, into the stories a community tells its children before bed. A flood that kills most of your world isn't just a weather event. It's the kind of experience that reorganizes how a culture understands divinity, punishment, mercy, and survival. You don't just remember a flood like that. You build a religion around not letting it happen to your children unwarned. So the ark itself starts to make a different kind of sense, not as a literal boat holding every species on Earth, but as a symbol of the one thing every flood survivor actually needed: preparation, a warning heeded in time. The story isn't really about the water, it's about the difference between the people who listened and the people who didn't. And this is where the twist lands because you already know this story, even if you've never opened a Bible or a cuneiform tablet. Your brain is wired to remember danger stories far more vividly than safety stories. This isn't ancient superstition, it's modern neuroscience. Researchers studying memory formation, including work associated with neuroscientist James McGaugh, have shown that emotionally intense events, especially ones involving fear and loss, get consolidated into long-term memory with far more strength than ordinary events. A flood that destroys your home doesn't fade the way an average Tuesday does. It gets burned in. And a burned-in memory doesn't stay a private memory. It becomes a story, then a warning, then a myth, then centuries later a sacred text. Which means the flood story was never really about proving God exists or disproving him. It was a survival mechanism wearing the clothes of religion. A way for a traumatized population to make sure the next generation didn't get caught unprepared. Watch the sky. Listen when the water starts rising faster than it should. Build before you need to, not after. Think about what you do today when a hurricane warning shows up on your phone. You've probably ignored one before. Everyone has. There's always a version of you that thinks the warning is exaggerated, that this time will be like every other time, harmless. And there's always a version of you that remembers, somewhere underneath the noise, that the people who ignored the warning are not the ones who got to keep telling their story. That instinct, the one that makes your stomach tighten when the sky turns a certain color, the one that makes you check the weather app one more time even when you already looked, that's not irrational. That's an inheritance. It's the same instinct that built an ark thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. It's the same instinct etched into 8 feet of ancient Sumerian silt. It's the same instinct that made 2 geologists dive to the bottom of the Black Sea looking for a lake that used to be a valley. You are not so different from the people who first told this story. You just don't call it a flood myth anymore. You call it a weather alert. So the next time it rains, and you glance up out of habit, understand what you're actually doing. You're not checking the weather. You're doing what every surviving culture on Earth has done since the beginning. You're listening to a memory older than writing itself, one that never needed a sacred text to survive, because it was never really a story about a flood at all. It was a story about you and whether you'll be the one who listens in time. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments of any other Bible stories you guys would like to hear about. Also, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you can be the first to know about future content.